Well, good morning. It is good to see you. It's real discouraging to show up and nobody's here, so it's good to turn around and there's actually people there. Welcome. If you're new with us, I'm David, one of the pastors. I used to be the senior pastor, but I hit an age where now I just call the lead pastor. So very sensitive about that when I'm one of the younger ones on the team to be called senior. So this morning, did you ever have that experience where you're looking at somebody, you see them, you're shopping or you're in a restaurant and you know them and you're going through the data banks and you're from somewhere, I know that person. Yeah, and then they say, Mom, hi, So this morning we're going to talk about identifying a person in particular. But let's do an exercise to get us into the swing of things, okay? We're going to identify some people. You can call the name out as soon as you recognize it. Give yourself points. And at the end, there's nothing in it for you. So let's identify some names. Some of these have double points, so let's look at who they are. The first one, who's that? That's 1 point. A double point would be for someone who needs some hairstyling gel, so could be 2 points. Albert Einstein, who's that? Stephen Hawking. And this one? Dirty Harry. So point for Dirty Harry, point for Clint Eastwood. All right. Who's that? Okay, and who's that behind her? Who's that? Martin Luther King, and the next one? Yeah. Now, all of that is important, but this next one is the one that sets us aside, the one that really, they're still arguing about till today. You can still buy magazines where they argue about the identity of this guy, but let's pick it up. Who's this next guy? Yeah, you get a point for Jim Caviezel, and you get a point for Jesus, all right. He says that role ruined his career because he's been typecast, but that is our look this morning as we continue to walk with God, learn more things about Him, and how to better walk with Him. And we can look at 1,000 faces, but the one thing that we really need to get clear on is who this guy is. In fact, he asked the question himself. He said they were coming from Caesarea Philippi, they're on the way, and they didn't travel 60, 70 miles an hour. They just walked and talked. And when people ride with me, I can hear them talking. They're talking to God, pleading, praying for mercy. Nobody talks to me while I'm driving because I have to rest while I'm driving. So, but they walked and talked, and Jesus says to the guys, who do people say that I am? We're going around here, crowds, thousands of people come out, and why are they coming, and who do they think I am? And so the disciples said, some think you're John the Baptist, others say you're Elijah the prophet. We looked at Elijah, a very powerful prophet in the past. Others say that you're some of the other prophets. What's the interesting thing there is all the guys that they said Jesus were dead. The only way that the crowd could explain the power and the presence of Jesus was something resurrected, some power came back to earth and had been walking the face of the earth again. It's the only way they could explain it. Somebody came back from the dead, somebody's on the other side. This guy's doing weird stuff for a normal person. So after they tell him everybody thinks you're somebody dead, then he says, well, who do you guys? Who do you say I am? And Peter says, you're the Messiah. You're the one we've been looking for. You're the Christ, the Son of God. And so that question, who is he, is debated today. I didn't put this in the insert in the bulletin. In fact, Doc, I don't even have a bulletin. And I'll get one. He'll give me one. And so the best presentation of this, is Case for the Real Christ. Right? People are arguing who Jesus was. They're saying he was married to Mary and stuff like that, and he's this and he's that. One of the more better researched responses to this is the Case for the Real Christ, and he goes through the material and lays out the real Jesus. So the real Jesus, who am I? And how do you determine it? That book, The Case for the Real Christ, lays out a way. And why did he write the book? He wrote the way because it's 2,000 years later, and people are still arguing who he is. He was this, he was that, he was that. So this morning, let's take a bit of a walk through the scriptures, and eventually we're going to see what did Jesus say about himself. If you want to know a character and what a person's like, no references intended, listen to what they say. And so, what did Jesus say about himself? That's going to be very revealing. And so, there's how people viewed him and how he explained himself. How many of you guys heard of C.S. Lewis? Screw tape letters? Yeah, okay. His famous lines are, liar, lunatic, or lord. He wrote about the time of the Second World War, and afterwards a bit, and some of you remember him personally. So, but today we've added one more to that, and let's look at, in today's context, how you would do it. We're going to use two letters. We're going to use a D, word that starts with D, and one that starts with F, and I put them in your insert if you want to take that out. The one we've added today is a decent fellow. That wasn't floating around when C.S. Lewis was there. So we got decent fellow, and then we got the lunatic, demented fool, and then we got the fraud, lunatic, the fraud, or son of God, which we would call divine friend. So decent fellow, demented fool, deceptive fraud, divine friend. And I think it's interesting that one of the more accepted propositions is probably one of the least possible. People would say, I don't think he was a god or superhuman. He was a decent fellow. He was a good teacher. He was the kind of guy that puppies jumped on his lap and kids loved him and kittens rubbed up against his pant leg, and you invited him to the Kiwanis because he was just a decent fellow. The unfortunate part of that is, as we look at this, there's a problem with that. The second one is a demented fool. He was mentally unstable. He thought he was God. He said he was God. And what do you do? How do you respond to that? You up his medicine or you incarcerate him, one or the other. Third possibility, if he's not a fool, he's a fraud. He knew what he was doing and did it anyways. And this divine friend is the one where we return with the story. Remember, what is the whole purpose of this? He created us to walk with us, to talk with us, to enjoy our company. And Jesus came because he wants to be our divine friend. He wants to be with us, walk with us, enjoy us, and he is setting up the way so God and man can be close again. So the fourth possibility is that he is who he said he was. God came down to man to renew the relationship which was broken at the entrance of sin in the world. All right. So let's look at what he said about himself and see how it reflects on these four alternative answers. The first one in your insert there is that he said that he asked people to follow him, to prepare to give up their life to follow him. To follow him at all costs. And he began to talk about his own life, and he said that, the chiefs and the Supreme Court, the Jewish power structure here, I'm going to suffer a lot of things because of them, and they're going to kill me, and in 3 days I'm going to raise again. And so then he goes on to say, if you want to be my disciple, you have to deny yourself, your desires, your life mission, and join my life mission. Take up your cross daily and come and walk with me. And then he said, whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. Even if you save your life for yourself, you lose it. But if you lose your life for me, you save it. So here he is saying, follow me even if it kills you. I used to eat spinach like that. My mother would insist you eat it, even if it kills you. Follow me, even if it kills you, he says. Look, nice guys don't do that. He wasn't a decent fellow. He was putting pretty high demands on him. He was calling people to be willing to die for him. At the men's group, it's interesting when some of the news stories come out where people are asked to identify themselves as Christian and then killed. Jesus actually said, this is going to happen. Relax. When it happens, don't deny me. If you deny me down here, when I come at the final coming of to claim everything and bring everything into order, if you couldn't stand up for me, I can't stand up for you. So please, identify with me, let it happen, even if it costs you your life. Now that's a pretty high demand from a guy who's a nice fellow. And we're going to look at that in a few minutes, but you can't follow that. That level of commitment to take up this instrument of death and follow him to the cross. Well, maybe he was crazy. Maybe he thought he was everything he said he was. And he was running around saying, follow me, I'm God. Look at this, I can walk on water. Follow me. Maybe he was crazy. Is that what's happening here? And the problem with that is, he spent a lot of time with a few people and a lot of time with many people. And the thing about frauds is they tend to self-identify over time. Are you with me? You heard the saying, give them enough rope and they will hang themselves? Frauds can't persist over time, generally speaking. And the thing that I struggle with greater if he was to be a fraud was the people who were closest to him were willing to do what he said, which was die, because they knew he wasn't a fraud. And I need to tell you, I like you, bud, but if someone says, if you don't agree with me that Bud's a girl, I'm going to kill you. Bud's a girl. I'm not going with it. If you don't agree with me that Jesus was not the Son of God, you die. They would not. Why? They spent 3 years with him. They watched what he did. He was doing such weird stuff, people thought somebody had come back to life and brought power with them. You could not explain it, and they would not deny it. He was not a fraud. He was the Son of God. So what was going on here, you could not plug that in when this guy said, follow me, even if you have to follow me in death. They said, no. He believed it, he was it, and he proved it. Now, there's some contraindicators when he says, follow me, be willing to give up all you have, and even if it costs you your life, follow me. Usually, people who say, give me all you have, want all you have. And they want to spend all you have and enjoy the luxury of their earnings. And these guys who teach poverty tend not to live in poverty. Are you tracking with me? Except for Jesus came with nothing, died with nothing. The only thing he had was a piece of clothing, and he even went out without that. So there was no evidence. And what people did give him, he gave poor people. So everybody's supporting his ministry, and he had very little, he kept none, and gave away. This is not an indicator of a guy who's a fraud. So we need to start eliminating some of this stuff as we listen to everything that he says he was. Let's look at another claim that Jesus made. He said, I'm the light of the world. Call me the first solar light. Buy into my company. I can light the whole world. He better be able to, or there's a problem. He better be able to make these claims, or those other three claims about him are true. He said, I'm the light of the world. Decent, look, you invite the guy to your Kiwanis. He's such a nice guy. Puppies like him. Cats rub on his pant leg. Kids think he's the greatest thing since sliced bread. You take him to the Kiwanis and he starts saying, I'm the light of the world. Let me tell you how the world operates. I have knowledge which will give you understanding that nobody else has. You move to another table, right? Okay? He's not a decent fellow. He's making claims that do not let you stop at that position. And he said, this world is dark and confused. It's groping and lost. They're bumping into each other looking for answers. And the whole world is dark and they will never find it. I have come to shed light into a confused world. That's what he was saying. So you can't say he was a good guy, because if you said he was a good guy and he started to stand up and say, I'm the light of the world, you're going to distance yourself from him unless he somehow is able to shine light on a dark situation. What's the third thing Jesus said about himself? He said that if you believe in me, this is when you ask him to go join another club. You're sitting at the lunch, they're handing out the peanuts to sell, and he says, by the way, if you believe in me, you will never die. You'll live forever. Come on. Think about that. How do you introduce this guy to people when he keeps saying these things? This is my very nice friend, Jesus. Except that he thinks he's the light of the world and he can make you live forever. And he also says, follow him even if you die. But other than that, he's a great guy. Few weirdness, but he's a good guy. And in that exchange where we're talking about, he was into a discussion with the scribes and Pharisees, again about who are you? What authority do you have? Why are you doing all this stuff? And when he gives his answer, they freak out. They say, aren't we right in saying you are a Samaritan, demon-possessed? Jesus says, I'm not demon-possessed, but I honor my Father. You dishonor me. I'm not seeking glory for myself, but there is one who seeks the glory, and he is the judge. Jesus never pointed to himself. He says, I'm teaching you what the Father wants you to hear. He was always referring back to his Father. And before, he would go all night and he'd talk to his Father before he started another mission on earth. And so he stayed in touch with his Father, and he says, my Father gets all the glory. I am not setting myself up. I am pointing you to the Father. Then he says, very truly I tell you, whoever obeys my word will never see life. Oh yeah, we'll never see death. Thank you. Look, this guy better prove he's not crazy, because he's not a nice fellow. You with me? He's either crazy or a fraud. We're starting to narrow this down. And a crazy person could make those claims but couldn't deliver. And so he's saying in the upper story, from my position as God, when sin entered the world, the cost of sin is death. I have come so that you are not mastered by sin, but I'm going to put in you the power so that you master sin, not it master you. And as soon as you master sin, I will give you the power to live forever. And so we're going to look at that claim later, but if he can't do it, he's a fraud. If he thinks he can do it and can't do it, he's crazy, but he's certainly not a nice fellow. Those are bold claims. Let's look at something else that's even more specific about Jesus talking about himself. Now, this is the one that's argued about the most. This is the most controversial claim and position of Jesus Christ. In fact, as this argument went on, we're continuing on, it's the same discussion. And who are they discussing? What are they discussing? Ironically enough, who he is. At this, when he says, if you believe in me, you'll live forever, okay? If you believe in me, I can give you eternal life. Now we know you're demon-possessed. Abraham died, so did the prophets, and yet you say whoever obeys your word will never taste death. They're saying the greatest men on earth, Moses, Elijah, Abraham, Joseph, all the greats died. You're saying you can keep people from dying. Who do you think you are? They're flipping out. They got their veins standing on their neck. Their eyes are popping. Their hands are waving. Their hair is an afro. They are mad. Are you greater than our father Abraham? He died, and so did all the prophets. Who do you think you are? Jesus replied, if I glorify myself, my glory means nothing. My Father, who you claim is your God, is the one who glorifies me. Though you do not know him, I know him. In fact, if I said I did not, I'd be lying, because I do. But I do know him, and I obey his word. Now we're going to get it. Now we're going to get it. It's game on here. He's already got them freaked out and mad. Their veins are popping. They are going away with the Herodians, who they hated, to figure out, talk about strange bedfellows, to figure out how to kill the guy. And so he pushes it to the extreme limit. Listen to what this guy does. Your father Abraham rejoiced at the thought of seeing my day. He saw it and was glad. Excuse me, you're not even 50, which means he was teaching at 30 when really he shouldn't have started till he was 40. But that aside, you're not 50. How did Abraham see your day? You just quoted someone over 1,000 years old. You're 50. Come on. Very truly, I tell you, before Abraham was born, I am. Whoa, ho, 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 ho. What did he just do? That phrase was reserved for Elohim, God, the one. They didn't say it. They would say that. Yeah, and when they wrote the name, they would take a special holy pen, write the name, put it up, and then write the rest of the manuscript. They wouldn't even write the name of God. This guy stands up and said, before Abraham was, I am. Who is I am? I am was the name God said to Moses. When you let the people out of Israel, Moses says, sure, hey, Mo, come on, follow me, guys. Let's leave Egypt, the most powerful army in the world. Let's go. He says, by the way, when I say, follow me, who shall I say sent me? It's fine for you to do the burning bush trick and light things up and talk to me, but they don't see that. Who do you tell me to tell them you are? Every man, every woman, every boy, every girl, in the sound of his voice, knew he just said, I'm the God that delivered you from Egypt. I'm the God who set apart Abraham. I'm the God who created the universe. I'm the God you say you represent. I am the I am. Who did they think he said? One of the laws of interpretation is what was received at the time. What did they think he said? They thought he said what he said, which is, he just said he was God, which was legal reason to stone him. The Romans didn't like it, and it was against the law, but they let it go. They literally could stone him and kill him. Why? He said he was God, and he better be God. Now, this is not in the notes, but I sometimes can identify with the scribes and Pharisees and their struggle. Come on. You got a guy running around who has no social status. He's in poverty. He didn't go to Yale or Edison. He is teaching and contradicting. They had set up a nice system. Come to Jerusalem, buy cattle from us to offer as a sacrifice. A little bit of markup, don't worry about it. You have to have ceremonial baths in our bathtubs. A little bit of charge, but don't worry about it. They had this neat system going where you had to come to God through them. They were making a killing, and along comes this guy and says, follow me, and I will give you access to God. I will see. Wait a minute, what about all these bathtubs? What about all of our trade? What about all this stuff we sell? What about our power with the Romans? And this guy says, follow me. No, 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 no. Stay in the system. Keep your money here. Bit of a conflict here. This guy, Jesus, was changing everything, and they wanted to kill him. But listen, there was good evidence that they knew who he was. I'm out of the light. How do I look in the camera now, Jimmy? I do this just to drive them nuts. This is how I entertain myself. In case you couldn't hear that, Mom said, that's pathetic. I'll edit that out. You'll never see it. Okay, now, if you remember when Nicodemus came to talk to Jesus, he said, look, we know who you are. Nobody can do this stuff if you're not from God. There were guys in that Sanhedrin who knew who he was. And not only that, he was very careful to identify that he could back these words up. He didn't just make the words. If you remember, one of the days they dropped this guy in front of him who was paralyzed, and what does he do? The guy's laying there, and he says, your sins are forgiven. Eggs, your sins are forgiven. Who cares? I want to walk. Why did he do that? These guys, he wanted them to know that he had the power to back up who he said he was, and he was God. So when he says, your sins are forgiven, they say, nobody can forgive sins but God. He set them up. Some people think Jesus was nice. Jesus was sneaky. Once they said, nobody can forgive his sins but God, the trap was sprung and they were in it. And they could not get out of it because of what he was to do next. Nobody can forgive sins but God. Let me quote you. Let me quote you. You say he's there because he sinned. You say he can't get up unless God forgives his sins. You say only God can forgive sins and heal him and bring him up. Right? Get up and walk. These guys had to overlook a mountain of truth to stick to their position. Their position was political, not factual. Are you with me? He was not a nice man. He wasn't crazy because he could do stuff like this. He was the Lord. He was the one. There's a lot of those things, but one more where he claimed to be the resurrection and life. Again, we're back to eternal life. Lazarus died. It took 4 days. It was 2 miles, guys. He was 2 miles up the road. He let the guy die. He let the guy die. Don't do that to me. But he said, this is all so that we can glorify my Father in heaven. He goes up. Lazarus is in there. They open the tomb. He says to Mary and Martha, he says, look, if he had been here, he wouldn't have died. Jesus says, if you believe in me, you're not going to, he's going back to the, if you believe in me, you won't die, right? And if he can't back that up, he's nuts. You with me? And a fraud. He's nuts or a fraud. And so he repeats the claim, and it's just about after this that they kill him. Because Lazarus, this little bring back to life trick, caused a huge avalanche of belief in him. So, I am the resurrection and the life. Do you believe that? She said, sure, I believe it. He'll rise again the last day. No, I'm the resurrection. I hold the keys to death and hell. I control your eternal destiny. Let's go talk to Lazarus. Open the door, Lazarus come out. If he can't do that, he's a fraud. But not only did he do it, he made an irrefutable argument for who he was, and now they had to kill him, or he would destroy their system of finances, and they would lose their power with the Roman Empire. They don't care who he is. They care about what who he is going to do to them. You with me? There it is. What is the choice? You can't hang on to decent fellow because he told you to follow him even if it kills you. You can't say he was a demented fool because he backed his stuff up. He wasn't deluded. He wasn't a deceptive fraud because he delivered on his promises, so it was true. But what he really was, get up and walk, God come down to man. That's who he is. As we close, I'm going to leave that question that Jesus gave with you. Who do you say that I am? Over 40 years ago now, when I got stuck with the inconvenient truth that there is a God, that messes you up so bad. What? There are rules to this game? There is a God? Stop messing with me and leave me alone. But that's not enough. After you figure out there is a God, you still have to figure out who this guy Jesus is. You have to figure out whether he's fraudulent, whether he's crazy, or whether he's real. And I was hoping there was no God. Lost that one. And against all hope, if you will research, do your homework, and look up the facts, this crazy guy Jesus lived. Did what he said he did. You have to practice some kind of intellectual dishonesty to do away with Jesus. You have to say all the rules that apply don't apply when it comes to him. We look at the whole world this way, but when it comes to him, I just don't want to believe it, so I'm going to change the rules. You have to do something. And so after discovering God, then I had to deal with Jesus Christ. My conclusion was, he was who he said he was. He backed up who he said he was. Now I had to do something. And then I told you, my friend said, you've been circling this tree long enough. Is there any reason you should not accept Jesus for who he said he was? Couldn't think of one, so I said, okay, let's do it. Now, what was that? That was another thing of Jesus' teachings, which is, if you're going to see me, if you're going to connect with God, I have to put in you a new life, a birth from above. Your body is here, I need to add your spirit. There is a spiritual dynamic to each person who accepts Christ into them. And when you talk to someone who does not have that spiritual dynamic, they look at you with glazed eyes without a hope of understanding what you're talking about. Track with me. You've done it. You've tried to say, this thing is the greatest thing since sliced bread. You need to experience this thing. But because they don't have the Spirit of Jesus Christ in them, they think you're nuts. And they can't understand it. You with me? You have to have this birth from above, or you can't see the light. You with me? Now, for those of you who've been walking with it for years, it's the neatest thing since sliced bread. This is the most wonderful thing. It took me 40 years to learn how to walk like a child of the King, to learn how to walk with the privileges of being born from above by God. But you need to decide